We are witnessing a huge escalation of aggression against not just Venezuela, but against many Latin American countries. But I'd say Venezuela is the country that is in the crosshairs for reasons that I will explain. Starting in August, you had this thing called Operation Southern Spear. They always have these stupid names for these things. They were bombing boats. You may have seen Donald Trump talk about it. They asked him, "Are you going to declare war?" He said, "No, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to kill people and they'll be dead," in typical Trump fashion. So they bombed about 21, last time I checked, boats. These are largely small boats, fishing boats, other things like this. Not even just Venezuelan boats, different boats, different people on it. And they've killed over 80 people. Last I checked, it was 83 people that they've killed. They've been they've been carrying out these extrajudicial killings, that's what it is, about one a week, bombing one of these boats. Now, Trump's claiming this is a big win because they're stopping the flow of drugs into America. That's what he's claiming. We'll get into whether or not that's true. In addition to this, there's a huge military buildup in the region, which is massively accelerated since August. In September, you had many naval ships, submarines. You've had fighter jets. You have other military aircraft that are deployed in Puerto Rico. And just in the past, I don't know the exact date that happened, but in the last week and a bit, there were the Gerald Ford Aircraft Carrier Strike Group, which is the biggest aircraft carrier, most powerful aircraft carrier in the world, with dozens of fighter jets, helicopters, etc. The total number of jets just in this one aircraft carrier group is more than what the entire country of Venezuela has as air defense. So this represents 20% of the Navy of America that is deployed near Venezuela now. So yeah, obviously this is a trend. What the hell is going on? This is a massive escalation. There's all sorts of connected to this. There's all sorts of provocative actions taking place. For example, just a little while ago, they flew bombers off the coast of Venezuela. They also left their transponders on so they could track them, which is a clear threat. The USS Gravely, which is a guided missile destroyer, is in Trinidad and Tobago, conducting joint military operations with the military there. That's a U.S. ally, which is just 11 kilometers off the coast of Venezuela. So there's all sorts of things to this. The U.S. already has 5 military and naval bases in the region and 15,000 troops in the region, which allows for a rapid mobilization of forces. Just recently, Trump told all their troops stationed in the Caribbean that their holidays were being restricted. They weren't going to get Thanksgiving and things like this, which, why would you do that? Right? That's, again, a clear provocation. It's sending a message. You're not going on holiday because we're going to need you for something. Just a few days ago, it was on the weekend, the Federal Aviation Administration, which is like kind of a regulatory body in America, told airlines not to fly over Venezuela. 6 airlines canceled flights. So these are all the things that you would do if you were going to go to war or you were going to bomb somewhere. So all these things together paint a picture of an massive escalation in the military aggression against Venezuela. So again, why is this happening? Trump claims that drugs are flowing into America. They're flowing into America. Fentanyl, obviously this is a crisis that is really affecting a lot of communities in Canada and America, in the US. And there's been a ramp up of the number of deaths caused by this. And Trump used this in the election, and he's then used it in the negotiations. He used it against Canada, if you remember, when he started making all this noise about Canada's ripping us off, and they're sending all the fentanyl over the border. He's using the same argument against Venezuela right now. It's about drugs, right? And these are drug boats that we're bombing, which that's why, it gives a certain legitimacy to their actions. We're trying to stop the flow of drugs, and Donald Trump has come out triumphantly claiming some wins here. We've stopped the flow of drugs into America. We're winning. He's trying to claim that to the population. So this is the official excuse. Connected to this, they've designated this cartel called Cartel de los Soles, which is the cartel of the sun, which he claims is this big drug cartel in Venezuela with Maduro as the head of the cartel. Maduro is the president of Venezuela. And so basically, you paint this picture. What this means is, they've designated this cartel a foreign terrorist organization. So what that means is they can carry out attacks in Venezuela against the U.S. or the Venezuelan government, against people connected to the Venezuelan government and the military, because it is a terrorist organization and a drug cartel, and they're trying to protect America. You can see them trying to give themselves a certain legitimacy, right? They put a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head, which is, by the way, almost twice as much as the bounty they put on Osama bin Laden's head, just to give you an idea of how serious this is. But yeah, I believe this is actually a bunch of nonsense. The drugs is complete nonsense. And it's really, Trump is using it once again as sort of a fig leaf to mask the actual real motivations behind his actions. Even the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration found that only 8% of the country's cocaine come by boat through the Caribbean, which is where they're bombing the ships. So it's a very small amount. And it's also not transported by these small speedboats that they're bombing. So these boats are not drug boats. This is made up. It's coming in shipping containers and on airplanes. Also, Venezuela doesn't really produce cocaine. The cocaine is produced in Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia, and is actually coming from the other side into the U.S. Fentanyl, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of this. Fentanyl comes into the U.S. via Mexico, and it comes from China mostly. So this seems it's a trumped up, for lack of a better word, it's a fig leaf to kind of give them a certain legitimacy to carry out these attacks, right, without declaring war on another nation. So then if the drugs are not the reason, then what is the real reason behind this massive escalation, these extrajudicial killings, these bombings of these boats, and this huge mobilization of the U.S. Navy and Air Force and military in the region? If you guys remember, when Trump came to power, he was threatening a series of Latin American nations. A lot of this was connected with his threats to deport all the illegals, all the illegal aliens and stuff like that he was claiming. All the criminals. He claimed Maduro had opened up the Venezuelan prisons and sent all their criminals into America, and that was undermining American society. He was claiming that. He claimed that about a whole bunch of South American countries. He put all sorts of threats on, and he actually started to put sanctions on certain leaders of countries, including the president of Colombia and some other countries, and even on Maduro, and it actually started to produce results because America is the most powerful country in the world, and you don't really want to piss them off. So the leaders of these countries started to back off and started to accept some of Donald Trump's conditions. For example, with Venezuela in particular, he made some agreements with Maduro. Venezuela accepted a bunch of these flights that they had just crammed people on, Venezuelans on, and sent them back to Venezuela. They accepted them back. First, they were not accepting them, then they accepted them. They released some of Venezuela released some U.S. citizens that had been in custody, and they started talks with America about a possible deal on the Venezuela's oil and minerals. So it seemed like Trump's threats were producing some results, right? So it didn't seem like you don't need to go to war for that, right? Because it seems like Maduro's ready to play ball. Seems like he was open to this, et cetera, et cetera. So what is behind the change? Because they had these threats, Maduro kind of moved in Trump's direction. It seems like they were doing some sort of negotiations. And now, just since August, it's all blown up again in this massive escalation. Donald Trump admitted that designating this Cartel de las Soles as a terrorist organization gave them the right to carry out bombings inside Venezuela. He said, yeah, we could. Maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't, and maybe we will, in typical Trump fashion. But what's behind the change now? So I think there's a number of things. I think I'll start with inside America. There's a number of things. So internally, Trump has become a lot weaker. If you remember when he was first elected, he was like triumphant. He had won a crushing victory against Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. He had increased his vote amongst pretty much every layer of the population, actually including Latinos. We'll get into that in a minute. He was riding high. He could kind of do whatever he wanted and no one was going to challenge him. And he didn't really have to listen to anyone who was trying to make demands of him, even people inside his party that were trying to get him to do different things. He kind of just did whatever he wanted. But now it actually hasn't been that long. It's astounding to say that because it seems like so much has happened since he's got elected, but it hasn't even been a year yet. And he has not fulfilled any promise. He has not fulfilled anything. He has not delivered on anything. He has not made life better. And he's embroiled in scandals. There's splits in the Trump camp. There's the Epstein saga scandal and all that. And he hasn't solved any problems inside America or abroad. He's claimed he's going to bring peace and all this stuff, and everybody knows it's complete bullshit. So I believe that because he's weaker, he's more isolated, even inside America, even inside the Republican Party, and he is therefore more erratic and a bit more dangerous because he'll bend more to some extreme factions. And there is a faction in the Republican Party that's made up of what is known as gusanos. They're right-wing Cubans mostly, and some right-wing Venezuelans and people like this that are ideologically obsessed with crushing Cuba and anything related to it, and they see Venezuela and the Maduro government as part of that. And they want to crush it. They see this as the evil communism, evil socialism, even though, as I will explain, I don't believe Venezuela is not socialist, and Maduro is actually, we do not support Maduro. Maduro is not a socialist president or anything like that. In many ways, he's doing the opposite of what a socialist would do. We'll explain that a bit later. But there is this wing, nonetheless, inside the Republican Party. In Florida, there's three Republican representatives known as the Three Crazy Cubans. And normally you just kind of ignore them. They're saying stuff and you don't really have to. But now as Trump's become weaker, he's actually needed them a bit more. And he's bent to them. And they have 3 votes, which things are pretty tight. So he kind of needs their votes. So it's a bit of horse trading behind the scenes, probably. And they can extract some concessions. And they want this. They want to go to war and they want to kill Maduro. They want to overthrow the government, and they want to probably put what's her name, the lady who won the Nobel Prize, Machado. They want to put her in power, and they want to. He hasn't done this with Cuba yet. They probably want to overthrow. They definitely want to overthrow the Cuban government. Related to this, as I mentioned, Trump, he actually won, and he had increased support amongst a lot of the Latino community in some states. This has plummeted because he's done this anti-immigrant policies, exporting people, and connected to this, deporting people. Connected to this, he's eliminated a whole bunch of laws that gave protected status to certain people. For example, there's this humanitarian parole program he eliminated that protected 600,000 Cubans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians from deportation. But he was playing to that sort of Trump MAGA base of deport them all or whatever. And this has actually pissed off a whole bunch of Latinos that are right-wing. They're very right-wing Latinos, and they all voted for him. And he pissed them off doing that. So you see he's zigzagging a bit, trying to find a base of support. And he thinks probably that this is going to, by pandering to this anti-Maduro, anti-Venezuela, tough guy type anti-drug thing, it's going to gain him some support. But I believe these things that I mentioned here, this is important. It does help explain some of his actions, but this only explains so much. And I think these things are largely secondary, actually. what he is doing here is connected to the wider picture. You got to look at the big picture. These types of things don't just happen because Donald Trump's crazy or because there's some Cubans in the Republican Party that are a bit, you got to look at the wider picture. So Trump, the bigger picture here is there is a split in the American ruling class. Trump defeated the old guard, the old wing, the dominant section of the American ruling class that had ruled for a long time, that basically had this liberal, free trade, liberal world order, and they had these big allies that they worked with, including Canada, Europe, right? And and Trump was very much opposed to this. He basically saw, why do we care about Europe? We don't care about Europe. We don't care about Ukraine. We don't care about Canada unless we can take their resources or something. We don't care about diplomacy or any of that stuff. We need to retrench. So what he means is you need to retrench away from places that are far away from America, that really don't have much to do with the national security interests of America, and focus on the key backyard, the classic geographical interest like backyard of the United States, of United States imperialism, and that is the Americas. And this is the so-called known as like Fortress America. And this is kind of sums up what Trump's general plan is. And so, this is Canada, Greenland. If you remember, right out of the gate when he got elected, what was he talking about? Canada, 51st state, Greenland, we could take that shit. Panama, you will retake Panama if we have to, and don't let China use the ports and all that stuff. So this is kind of connected to his whole plan. And to, retrench in the Americas, consolidate American power, kick China out of America so they can focus on China, which is the main rival of American imperialism in the world. And that is really the kind of general strategy that Trump is pursuing. So I believe this conflict here, therefore, needs to be viewed within this, not as some... I've seen a lot of people online talk about it. It's like crazy, he's just nuts, like what the fuck? Like I think a lot of what Trump does can seem superficially on the surface as illogical. And liberals definitely actually refuse to engage in his logic and just claim he's nuts because they don't want to accept reality. But Trump does have a consistent logic to a lot of what he is doing. So yes, the bullying of Venezuela is not happening in isolation. It's happening, actually, I mentioned already a number of things. Panama, when Trump got elected, he bullied Panama to end its participation in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. He bullied them to allow U.S. troops on Panamanian soil. He forced C.K. Hutchinson, which is a Hong Kong-based company, to sell 2 key ports, although that's not entirely finished because China's trying to overrule it. It's a big dispute. Brazil, in August, he put 50% tariffs on Brazil. The stated reason was because his buddy Bolsonaro was being tried and found guilty, actually. But the real reason is you gotta look beyond the surface, right? The real reason is he's protecting the interests of U.S. multinationals. Brazil, there's a trading bloc called the BRICS. The B is Brazil. And he doesn't like what Brazil has been doing. They've been too cozy with China, with Russia, with these other powers, right? So he's trying to send a message, trying to punish Brazil for their role in the BRICS. Colombia, Trump has also escalated aggression against Petro, the new president of Colombia, who's kind of left-leaning. He's implemented some policies that Trump doesn't like. Trump has called Petro an illegal drug dealer. He revoked Petro's visa. He sanctioned him and his family. He cut off all U.S. aid to Colombia, and he's threatened to impose tariffs on Colombia. So it's not just Venezuela. And Argentina is an interesting case because you had this very Trumpian libertarian guy, Milei, elected, and Trump has done the opposite with Argentina. He's gone out of his way to bail Argentina out, providing lots of money, billions and billions of dollars to Argentina because Milei's tanked the economy, and he's bailed them out. when asked why they did this, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated that the U.S. is, quote, committed to get China out of Argentina. So that's right from the horse's mouth. This is why they're doing all of this stuff. Although I believe this is not that simple. So Argentina has committed to break relations with China, to cut ties with them. They canceled a contract that they had for an astronomical station that China was building. Although this isn't that simple because Argentina exports a lot to China and they have really deep trade relations with China. Actually, every South American country does. So it's untangling that is, as much as Trump wants, is not going to be that easy. A lot of people have called this the Don Roe Doctrine. If you know anything about U.S. history, this is a play on the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which was summed up in the phrase America for the Americans. And this was largely at the time used to kick Europe out of the Americas, the European powers out of the Americas, Britain, Spain, etc. This doctrine was then supplemented in the 20th century by the Roosevelt Corollary, which Roosevelt summed this up as he said it's speak softly but carry a big stick. And this is sort of your typical kind of it's known as gunboat diplomacy, which is, yes, you will make the decision and we have guns to your head, and if we don't like your decision, we'll overthrow your government. And the U.S. did this for decades and decades. They were doing this all over Latin America, overthrowing governments left, right, and center. The most well-known is the overthrowing of Allende in Chile, and they put this brutal dictator Pinochet in power. So yes, Trump's current policy seems like a carbon copy of this old policy from 100 years ago, and the Monroe Doctrine and all this. So why? I guess the big question is why all this is happening. So following World War II, the U.S. became the dominant imperialist power. And then you had the Cold War, was a conflict between the US imperialism and the Soviet Union, which was a different economic model, right? And the US, because it was the dominant power, it could just dictate to everybody. It could basically just tell any country what to do. Any country that wasn't in the Soviet sphere of influence, they could tell them what to do and they would have to do it, more or less. And this was accelerated after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where America was basically the only world power. And they became super arrogant and they just ordered everyone around. But things change. And the big factor that has changed here is China. So China in the 90s started really opening up to the market. There was a controlled opening, though. The Chinese Communist Party from the top controlled the process so they did not get swamped out by American imperialism. They did not get fully dominated by American imperialism. And they nurtured the creation of a Chinese bourgeoisie. Now you have hundreds and hundreds of billionaires in China, and China is a massive trading empire. And it is actually the biggest trading partner to Africa, South America. It is the second biggest trading partner after the US to Latin America as a whole and the Caribbean. So basically what's been happening is they've been eating America's lunch right in their backyard. For example, trade between China and Latin America has grown from just 12 billion in 2000 to over 500 billion last year. This is projected to go up to over 700 billion by 2035. China is a major source of foreign direct investment, $141 billion in loans to Latin America and Caribbean countries between 2005 2021. These investments is all mostly in raw materials, copper, iron ore, soybeans, oil, basic raw materials, energy, infrastructure, telecommunications. Over 20 countries in the regions have signed on to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is trade corridors all over the world, right? At the end of 2024, and this has been accelerating actually. So at the end of 2024, China opened up a megaport in Peru, which cut down the travel time for Chinese ships to get to Latin America. Colombia has built the first subway line in Bogota, and they used a Chinese company to do it. China has free trade agreements with Chile, Peru, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. In May this year, Xi Jinping held a summit. Before this year, usually China would be lucky if one Latin American president would visit China. You'd have maybe one, okay, you'd have some chats, they'd have some trade, whatever. This year you had, I don't know how many, maybe 10 more. They had a whole summit with Latin American and Caribbean leaders, and Xi Jinping pledged billions of dollars or more investment. So you can see there's closer and closer trade relations, and this is extremely worrying to American imperialism. So US and the US government sees this as a huge threat. So as Marxists, we got to look beyond the surface and beyond what the politicians say their reason is, or what they say about themselves or about their actions, and you got to look at the economics beneath it, right? To help to understand. Otherwise, the world is just a crazy, complicated, random place with messed up things happening. But all this is perfectly logical from the standpoint of American imperialism. And they were negotiating. Well, negotiating is a weird word to say. They were, in Trump's weird way, he was sort of negotiating with some of these countries. But it seems like the early period also wasn't getting what they needed. And so they're getting impatient, and they're seeing actually the tariffs that Trump imposed on many countries in Latin America. In many countries, most countries, it had the opposite effect. For example, Brazil, they put 50% tariffs on Brazil. What happened? Brazil exports large amounts of things like beef and soybeans and stuff to America. What happened? China stepped in and said, oh, that's okay, we'll buy it from you. And so China started buying it. This has happened with a number of countries. So normally Donald Trump's like, hey, you're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to threaten you. We're supposed to put tariffs on you, and you're supposed to come crawling back to us, and we exact concessions. The difference with today's world is that you have China. And so a lot of these countries have found Lula in Brazil. Lula's, to be honest, he's a bit of a coward, I think. But he's found backbone because he can rely on China and he can shift trade to China. He doesn't have to rely on the United States. So a lot of countries have been doing this. So yeah, this is an increasingly urgent thing that the US need to essentially reconquer their backyard, what they consider to be their backyard in Latin America. And kick China out, which is their main trading rival around the world. But this is easier said than done, as I already mentioned with the tariffs. So with some countries, they have a lot of weight. For example, Mexico. 80% of Mexican exports go to America. So the U.S. has a bit of an easier time bullying Mexico because they can just turn the tap off and they can just completely destroy the Mexican economy. Mexico has come out committed to putting tariffs on China. Shane Baum, the president of Mexico, actually came out recently saying, hey, we'll use our Navy to track down these drug boats. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Basically, the Mexican Navy will do America's dirty work. That's what she said. But this is not the same in all countries. It's different in different South American countries, especially in South America where they're very heavily dependent on exports to China. And I will add, because of the tarnished legacy of America, of the United States in Latin America, Yankees, they're hated. Like, the US imperialism is widely hated. So it's politically harder for them to just bully a country and get away with it. It's harder for a government in South America to be seen to be bullied and get away with it to their own population. Decades of military coups, regime change, horrible death squads, falling living standards, all these things that everybody knows that the U.S. backed up, that they did. So there's very deep anti-U.S. sentiment, and logically so, actually. So yeah, will they be able to reconquer their backyard? That is the question we are discussing. Where am I here? I'm missing something. Sorry. So yes, whether or not they'll be able to get away with this. So they currently have 15,000 troops in the area. I'm not in Donald Trump's head, so that's very difficult to know what his actual motivations are. As we've seen many times, he likes this sort of art of the deal thing, play a ridiculous hand, like make an over-the-top threat, and then the other side capitulates and gives you something less than what you're demanding, but more than what you would get if you just negotiated normally. So he could be trying to do that. Donald Trump is very weak, and he's looking for wins. He's looking for claim. He needs to claim a victory. But I will say that rationality doesn't always triumph in these situations, and sometimes events have a logic of their own. And so he is a bit beholden to this extreme wing of the Republican Party that wants him to go to war, wants to oust Maduro. Very clearly, they've said that. They want to overthrow the Venezuelan government. The question is whether or not they'll be able to get away with it. So the model for this was in the 1970s, where they sent in 27,000 troops and they overthrew Noriega. Whether or not they'll be able to get away with that today is another matter. One, polls show in America that over 70% of the American population are opposed to military action against Venezuela, definitely opposed to an invasion. The American population is generally after the prolonged wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that everyone recognizes were absolute failures. The American population is war-weary, does not want more wars, and the American population does not find that Donald Trump has actually justified this. So that would cause massive political problems for Donald Trump at home, who is already weak, and there's divisions within the Trump camp on many, many questions on Israel-Palestine, on Epstein, on whatever, you name it, right? On Ukraine, on a lot of stuff. So whether or not he can get with it there. But then there's also how many troops would they actually need if they were to actually invade Venezuela with the aim of overthrowing the government? They have 15,000. It would take way more, in my opinion, way more than 15,000 to actually, I don't even know what you would consider a success. Because even if you overthrew the government, it probably would plunge the country into civil war because people would not support any government that was imposed on them. And there would be people that would be loyal to the Venezuelan government that would be fighting. There would be even people that weren't necessarily loyal to the Venezuelan government that would still fight what would be seen as a foreign occupation or whatever. And based on what Trump has said and done so far over the years, it seems like his MO is more of the quick strikes rather than the prolonged wars, which he claimed one of his promises when he got elected was he was going to do away with what he called forever wars because there's such a war weariness in the American population. So maybe they carry out assassination attempts. They definitely be trying to appeal to wings of the Venezuelan military to step in, but that doesn't seem to be producing any effect. Maybe they're going to carry out bombings. I don't know. But this all has a logic of its own, and I think whether or not any of this will work is another matter. So I think for communists, we need to explain clearly what this is. This is, once again, the United States, US imperialism, trying to dictate to another country after years of blathering on and on about sovereignty and democracy of countries and never violate. This is the US once again trying to overthrow a government that they do not like. And it is very clear this is for pure economic reasons. It has nothing to do with the drugs, right? And so, yeah, the position of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the genuine position of communists must first and foremost be hands off Venezuela, hands off Colombia, hands off Latin America. Now, on the question of Maduro, because some people raise, does that mean, someone raised it with me before the event today, does that mean that we support the government of Nicolas Maduro? I would say no. We are not supporters of the government of Maduro. Maduro does use socialist language, but again, you need to look at what he actually has done. So I remember the government of Hugo Chavez, which was the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution that brought the current regime to power in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez would come out and he would not only talk about socialism, but he would expropriate capitalists. He would appeal to workers to occupy and run their plants. He would appeal to the working class. He was constantly attacking US imperialism. He wasn't doing deals with them. Maduro, in many ways, is doing the exact opposite of what Chavez has been doing. He's been doing deals with imperialist countries. He's been selling land back to landlords after it had been taken from them by Chavez and distributed to the peasants. He's been prioritizing paying the foreign debt over social programs. So no, we're not fans of the Maduro government. I believe this is irrelevant. This is irrelevant. We're not talking about that. The job of dealing with Maduro and the Venezuelan government is the task of the Venezuelan working class. It is not the task of the US imperialism, no less. It is not the task of US imperialism to deal with that. And besides, they don't want to overthrow the Venezuelan government to impose democracy or help workers or something in Venezuela. It has nothing to do with that. Even if they were claiming that, which they aren't, as we've seen in country after country after country around the world where America has intervened, it has not led to these things. It has not led to anything good. Look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan, for example. Look at Libya, which has descended into a fractured mess where slavery has been restored in some areas. So yes, we are opposed to this. We say hands off Venezuela. We say Yankees, go home, get out of Latin America. And yeah, we need to oppose, we are communists in Canada. We are communists in many ways. In many ways, I will say this, in many ways, Canada is the 51st state of America. They act like it. They do everything that the US wants while pretending to be different. Our main enemy is here. It's the Canadian and the American imperialists, and we need to fight them first and foremost. So nothing good comes of that. On how do we fight this? How do we fight this? That's what we need to talk about. It is talked about sometimes in some areas of the left that it's good that the US is getting displaced by China because China is progressive. China's socialist. China's not imperialist. Well, I just want to say a few things about that. Yes, our main enemy is American imperialism, Canadian imperialism, yes. But that doesn't mean we support what I would describe as Chinese imperialism. If you don't believe me, I'll just go through some of the details. This is, if you read Lenin's Imperialism, it's a book we have copies? Yeah, we have copies here. You should get a copy of it. Very excellent book. It's the classic Marxist explanation of the phenomenon of imperialism. What Lenin describes is the argument about China is usually, well, look, China's just doing trade and investment, right? They're not doing coups like America did. They're not overthrowing government. They're not threatening military. That's actually true. That is true. So does that mean that China's not imperialist? Well, if you read Lenin's Imperialism, actually it's not really talking about the military side of things. It's talking about the economic process. And if you look at it, what is China doing? China is investing. Chinese companies are investing in sources of energy, raw materials, markets, and fields of investment. And Chinese capitalism also, are they doing this for the benefit of poor people in Latin America? Well, I believe Chinese capitalism, this is capitalist relations. They're hiring workers to mine stuff for them and exploiting those workers so they can get the resources back to China. This is classic imperialism. Chinese capitalism is not a friend of workers or poor in the region, and they have actually allied with repressive reactionary regimes to protect their investments. For example, China has close ties with Bukele. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, probably, maybe, no? Okay, cool, I'm good. In El Salvador, which is a dictatorship. As I mentioned, China is heavily invested in Peru, which the current Peruvian government is an illegitimate government that overthrew Pedro Castillo, and in order to consolidate itself, carried out brutal repression against the movement, killing over 50 people. This is governments that China is allied with. Also, they have close ties with Ecuador, which is a right-wing repressive government of Daniel Noboa. A month ago, China gave $20 million to this government, and the reason they gave the money to them, was to give the money. You could say, oh, that's very benevolent of China, right? But they gave it to areas that were negatively affected by a national strike that had been organized by an indigenous peasant organization that had disrupted economic relations. So China basically was like, here's some money and buy them off, or basically stop them from disrupting our economic activity. So basically, I believe this is China playing kind of an open strike-breaking role. But this is classic imperialism. Sure, it's not at the level of US imperialism, which has invaded militarily, but at some point, China may be forced to go down that road, probably would be forced to go down that road to protect its interests. But as it is now, actually, they don't need to, because America is so hated. Countries are coming, and actually China is out-competing America largely in terms of trade, so they don't need to intervene militarily. They can just offer preferential trade agreements, loans, investment, etc. And countries, even countries that say they're allied with America, the economic gravity of the situation forces them to trade with China. So I believe, how do we fight U.S. imperialism? That's the question. How do we fight U.S. imperialism? I don't think by siding with Chinese imperialism it does any good for anything. Actually, it doesn't help us, because what does that actually teach us to do? Just cheerlead cheerlead Chinese companies, cheerlead the Chinese government. No, we believe in the power of the working class, right? So yeah, this is ultimately related to the position of genuine communists against the escalation of bullying against Venezuela, Colombia, and other Latin American countries. We need to fight America. The Americas, and Latin America, South America in particular, is very rich, but the people are poor in a lot of these countries. So we say that the working class should be in control of the resources, should be in control of all the wealth of society. And yeah, you don't fight imperialism by siding with another imperialism. You fight imperialism by the real way to ultimately eject imperialism from South America is for the working class to come to power. And that's why we are internationalists. We are part of an international. We have, as a part of the Revolutionary Communist International, we have sections in almost every single country in Latin America, in South America, and we're fighting the same fight against U.S. imperialism, and against not just U.S. imperialism, but also against local capitalist powers in those countries that work hand in hand with either American imperialism or with Chinese imperialism. So yeah, we fight for the workers to come to power in Canada, in America, and all over the Americas, and to build a united socialist federation of the Americas where all the wealth can be put to use to solve all the major pressing problems that we have today. So yes, this situation is very concerning. Obviously, we are completely opposed to this imperialist aggression against Latin America. We need to keep our eye on it, and we have to act. We should denounce if there is some form of actual open military conflict. We have to be alert, right? Because this will cause it's going to be a fucking scandal, and we have to be prepared to mobilize against that and call out our government, which has actually said almost nothing about it. They don't want to upset America. They obviously know that this is against international law and it's a bunch of made-up stuff, but they don't want to upset America because Canadian imperialism also wants to do a trade deal with Donald Trump and with American imperialism. So, and they're not going to do anything about this. So yes, this just shows how cynical politics is under capitalism, where the dollars come first over human life. So yes, we need to fight against imperialism. We need to fight for socialism. It's connected to the fight for socialism, for the workers to come to power, so we can do away with this madness of this system, and we can fight for a society where everyone can get ahead, where everyone can have what they need to survive. And yeah, we don't have imperialist governments intervening, overthrowing governments, assassinating. We don't really know what's going to happen here, but it's clear that there's a certain direction to this. I will leave it at that.